Hello, friends! Welcome to episode 134 of Storyteller Conclave. This is a show all about helping you run the best tabletop role-playing game that you can, whether you're a new storyteller or dungeon master learning the craft, or an experienced storyteller looking to take your game to the next level. I'm Sarah.
And I'm Rob.
How are we doing, Rob?
You know, I'm struggling with my tablet today, so I'm using my phone for the show sheet. This will be great.
Do you need me to tilt my tablet your direction there?
We'll be fine.
All right. We had your game last weekend.
We did.
How do you think that went?
I think I struggled a little bit at times, but I felt like the energy level was very low.
Yeah.
With everybody, that everybody was just kind of struggling a little bit with general energy as people. But I think in the end you guys did great. I think it pulled through. It did just fine. Having such a long break between combat, I think definitely changed the feel of how you guys moved through that. So, because it was one combat scenario kind of continuing.
Stretched across 2 game sessions, basically. Yeah.
So, which I don't normally like doing, but at the same time, I think it was kind of necessary.
Yeah, it was kind of a climactic scene, though, you know.
Yeah.
So, puts kind of a nice bookend on a chapter there. I'm sure we've got an epilogue chapter to go.
Correct.
Or episode to go, but we that more or less wrapped up the plot in the area. We just have to kind of like say goodbyes and some FUs to some people. And
yeah, definitely, I would agree with all of that. So,
but I think it went really well. You had some interesting waves of NPCs come in. Like I thought it was a really good encounter from a standpoint of it. Rather than throwing like 300, dark elves at us all at the same time, you threw like 5 at a time, and then surprise, 3 rounds later, here's a mage, and then here's a couple other assassins and stuff.
Yeah, I kind of wanted it to feel like they were about as unprepared for you, yet they were thinking it was going to be something else.
Mm-hmm.
Like I wanted it to have that feel that it was a struggle on both sides, but at the same time, they're like, we're not ending this. Mm-hmm. This isn't just going to end that simply. And I wanted to leave you guys enough gap space to have it go a couple different ways. And I had some plans. Like, one of the options was you realizing that you were getting flanked from behind and flooding it anyways.
Mm-hmm.
And seeing what happened.
Yeah.
Or trying to cover up the hole. Or trying to deal with, going down in after them.
Mm-hmm.
All of those were options that were on the table, and you guys went with option A. Let's cave this thing in and just get the heck out of here.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the other things I really liked about the combat encounter was that rather than just being at, side A versus side B, and whoever's got, people standing at the end wins,
Mm-hmm.
it kind of had a victory condition where we're going into these caverns and trying to arm and set off some bombs that had been planted in there for just such an instance, but we needed to make sure that they were all connected, essentially, and that we could trigger them.
Yeah, and learning about what the truth was behind the prison itself, like where it had come from, why it was there.
Yep.
And there's still a little bit of discovery there, but I think you guys figured out the primary premise that it wasn't a prison to start with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was really, really well done.
Thank you.
Thank you. Greatly enjoyed game. So.
What was funny was one of the things that came up in it was the fact that we had some issues with familiars.
Yeah, we had. My character is an evoker wizard, but I swear I spend more time summoning elementals than a conjurer.
Way more time you spend summoning.
But I gotta have a tank while I'm stand behind while I blaster cast.
That is true.
So everything after the first spell is an evocation, but the first one's always a conjuration for me.
Pretty much. Yeah.
But then and we've got 2 wizards in the party, myself and Overwatch, who frequently submits questions for us and such like that.
Yeah.
And we both had our familiars out. I had a summoned earth elemental. So there was a lot of NPCs on the board. Working for us.
And just some of the mechanics there were a little garbling for the moment of trying to figure out like when they would be useful, how would they be useful, and I think that set some things apart with some of the players, and comments were made that like I didn't feel like this was handled well, not necessarily by any fault, but that the mechanics itself just made it kind of blah.
Yeah,
almost.
Yeah, well, I think that was more in reference to Bigby's hand. And Bigby's hand sits in a weird space where it's not technically like an autonomous summoned creature.
Correct.
It's more along the lines of a spiritual weapon. It's something you have to physically like manipulate yourself and tell it what to do.
It's an object, which is the way it's defined, and I'm like, okay, that makes a lot more sense for why it can't do things on its own.
Bigby's hand doesn't have a brain.
No.
You know.
There's no autonomous. It's not a summoned creature. It is merely a summoned object, which is a funny way of saying it. But I mean, the spiritual weapon is the same thing.
Yeah.
There's actually a number of things that work in that same way.
Tensor's floating disc, I think, and things like that, where like they're just force objects that act in certain ways.
Yeah. So funny kind of dovetail into today, in the sense that what we're going to be talking about is, your companions, your followers, your pets, your familiars, those things that are attached to the players but aren't characters within themselves. They're NPCs as well.
NPC extensions to the party,
yeah. And in that, it can cause a lot of disservice, a lot of confusion. It can slow and muddle play.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of terrible reasons not to even include them. I know for a lot of my games that I played in, there were game masters who were very adamant about no followers, no companions, no pets.
Yeah, I understand that completely. Like Sean wanted very much to have followers and companions for his character. He's playing a very charismatic bard, noble character, and so it makes perfect sense for him to want companions or bodyguards or things like that.
Yeah.
And I know initially when he started wanting to do that, there was definitely a part of me that just bristled at the idea of like, oh God, I don't want to handle that, you know?
Yeah.
And for what it's worth, he was very cool about it. He's like, look, if this is something you don't want to handle, like, just let me know, because you seem like it really aggravates you.
Well, I mean, it immediately puts a stress on trying to achieve what would normally feel like an easy thing, because you now have another NPC to manage, something else to worry about. And so I kind of want to step into this with the followers and companions, which is what he specifically talked about.
Yeah.
And these are, again, just to quickly define these, if you're not comfortable or not familiar with this, followers and companions are other characters, other traditionally bipedal and intelligent characters that can react, but they are NPCs. They are controlled by the storyteller for the most part, but their actions are often dictated and directed by the players. Common examples of this back in D&D was even back in 1st edition when fighters reached 9th level. If they had a stronghold, they could get followers who would take care of their stronghold.
Yep.
Naturally, people who wanted to be around them wanted to be around those riches and take care of the servants and serfs and advisors and things like that.
Sure.
AD&D picked this up in
2nd edition,
at 5th, and I think you actually got warriors.
Okay.
You actually got, you would have other guardsmen come with you. And I always thought that was kind of interesting, that basically you garner an adventuring party with you at times.
Yeah.
3rd edition had the leadership skill, which allowed you to have them.
That one I remember.
Yeah, I remember that in 3rd edition, and
number of followers equal to your charisma modifier or something like that. Like,
it got abused.
It was instantly
heavily.
like, I have 4 followers. Yeah,
and I always thought that was interesting, and I watched people abuse it left and right.
Oh, of course,
especially bards who just be like, I have groupies, and my groupies will defend me. You know, and it's a sad thought that you're going into that, and we'll kind of explain why. But it definitely made it feel very muddled. So.
Savage Worlds itself has several edges that deal with commanding followers.
Yeah.
They're a lot less you attract a follower, and a lot more of like, if there are NPCs under your command, if there are extras under your command,
right,
you can now spend your bennies for them.
Right.
Or you can now use your beneficial abilities on non-wild cards that are under your command and things like that.
Right.
And those are kind of neat. But I think Savage Worlds, because of its playstyle and because of its sort of stripped down rules system and such like that, plays a lot quicker. And so I would say you're not on average penalized as much time wise and sort of mental encumbrance wise if you don't or if you include followers.
Right.
It's just a lot easier to do in Savage Worlds, I think, than in D&D. But also, like, you know, we kind of mentioned earlier, like, my character summoning up an elemental and such like that. Like, those kind of fit under the same banner in a sense. They're less lasting NPCs, but they kind of still have the same side effect of, like, adding another creature to the combat initiative round.
Yeah, I think they fit in that. I mean, when we talk about it mechanically, we're talking about they can add to combat. Mm-hmm. It's possible. More than likely, they're going to be there to help reduce the mundane tasks. You know, shopping, maintenance, gathering some information, like research, things like that. Things that the players may, while they're out adventuring, may have them do in another way.
Sure.
Negotiating or sending messages is another big thing. But the biggest thing is that they're there to assist and give some level of assistance, whether it's an advantage on a roll or straight up giving you kind of a passive roll on an existing thing. Whereas, like, you have perception that's passive, you know, and you have your passive saves. There's no reason why you can't have a hired researcher give you a passive on a, you know, give your whatever your base lore skill is, a passive roll for that as well.
Sure, absolutely. So, you mentioned even shopping.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can imagine, like, if time is on a premium, you know, we need to leave in the morning, but I don't have the time to go and shop for the ingredients and then do the ritual that uses the ingredients. I can be setting up the ritual while an NPC that I've got as a follower is going out and buying these things for me. And you wouldn't think that sort of thing is so useful, but oh my god, I can think of a dozen times off the top of my head.
Well, especially when you've got higher level characters who've got a lot more going on. The last thing they want to think about doing is maintenance tasks.
Yeah, absolutely. You know? Absolutely.
So.
And that's just the non-combat stuff, and obviously, you know, arming them up and fighting in combat is a whole other benefit. You know, an extra warm body on your side.
Exactly. But one of the things that I think is expressively important about that is that they are on the PC side at all times. They're on that side of the table.
Sure.
And that's, I think, one of the hardest parts about storytelling, that this kind of gives you something indirectly. And that is that when you're presenting information, whether it be, you know, a description in a dungeon or an item that they found or you know, a note on a body or something like that, there's always that air as a player to believe, is this a red herring? Is this factual? How honest and truthful is this information? And
the paranoia runs deep in some tabletop role-playing games.
Very much so. And that, I think, more depends on where you came from.
Sure.
But these types of people and individuals and characters can be definitely presented as a way to present truthful and factual information. Anything coming from these are as if they're on their side of the table and getting these honest answers.
Yeah.
And that right there gives you that, for lack of a better term, that advisor on that side of the table.
Mm-hmm.
That the players can feel confident about, that they can be constantly reminded to go to, as saying, like, you know, well, I need them to go find research on this, and they will bring the facts to them. You know, I always thought it was interesting that when a companion or a follower finds something, it can always be a factual thing, because they're not a conniving character. They're an honest, truthful character to them at all times.
Sure, absolutely.
And I think the few people who I've seen who have turned companions and followers on players are doing a horrible disservice to their players.
I think you're destroying all of the trust you have at the table, honestly.
Exactly.
And if you want to watch characters become paranoid of literally every single person they meet forever for the rest of that campaign, that's the quickest way to do it, is turn one of their followers against them.
Yeah. I mean, there are games that put adversarial or contentious things in. I mean, 7th Sea has it with Star-Crossed and with Hunted and things like that, where you will always have an NPC, but those are more like plot elements that the player is giving you access to. Those aren't followers or companions.
Those aren't followers. Those are not designed to be someone who is your trusted ally who is in service to you.
Correct.
Ever.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the other big things too, is like looking at, for instance, Savage Worlds rules on like animal companions.
Mm-hmm.
That's an edge.
Yeah.
you spend an advance
Exactly.
to get that.
Yep.
And it even says, I mean, basically because you do spend an advance on there. Like if something happens to your animal companion, whatever that may be, if you are separated from your animal companion, you get a new one.
Yeah.
Like whatever contrivance the storyteller needs to make that happen, whether it's a magical thing or whether it's you go out and you befriend, another one wanders out of the woods and you make friends with it or whatever.
Right.
Whatever story contrivance you need to get there, you spent points on it. You get it.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I always liked bringing back around is the fact that it is a character bonus that you're doing this. You've paid for it or you've earned it, and therefore it is something on your side of the table.
We're not talking about random NPC Bob that you met at the corner store
and
who
befriended.
You decided to chat up. Yeah, this is someone you spent points for. You bought the leadership feat. You bought the animal companion feat. You have the followers feat. Whatever.
It's a level 9, thing that you get. It's a, I remember Rangers always got an animal companion.
Druids too, I think.
Yeah,
right?
Druids as well. Wizards get their familiars. Again, they're never going to turn on them.
Yep.
They will always be a point of honesty and fact.
Yeah.
And that is a line that can't be crossed and should never be crossed.
Agreed.
So.
Agreed. I really like having NPCs or NPC followers and stuff like that as connections to the PC's backstory.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, or where they reference it constantly.
Yes. So having someone who is maybe like a retainer to your fallen noble house or something like that. Who maybe you and them were the only persons who got out as as the other noble family decided to kill all the members of your family, Game of Thrones style.
Right.
So you have that shared bond with them, and they trust you implicitly as their liege, but you can also trust them implicitly as a loyal bodyguard.
Yeah,
that sort of thing.
I always look at major characters who would be considered followers or companions, like Alfred to Batman.
Oh yeah,
he doesn't always agree with him. He doesn't always see eye to eye with him, but 100% backs whatever he's doing,
and always has his best interest.
Has his best interest in mind.
Yes, absolutely.
There are definitely countless examples of these in the stories. Almost every major sidekick kind of has that feel where they're there for the main character. They're there for the main part of the story, and they feel for them, and they will bring them. But I mean, they're going to tell them when it's a dumb idea, and that's the whole beauty of being able to play those types of characters as a storyteller. Is it allows you to still be a little whimsical. It allows you to still add edges. It still challenge what they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
But also recognize that they are there for them.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm your man for all time. Is a great line
from Count of Monte Cristo.
Count of Monte Cristo, where he basically is just like, "Why are we doing it this way? We could just go in, get the girl, leave, bing bang boom, we're done.
We're back by the weekend. Boom, 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 boom. How is this a bad plan?
But it's he has to get his revenge, and he's like, fine, then I will help you get your revenge.
Yep.
And because I'm here for you no matter what. And
Jacopo was such a great character.
He was an incredible companion, one thing that I didn't put in here was sometimes your players hand the companion that they get to you on a silver plate, where they tell you something that happened to them or something that they did, and you can easily see someone who would follow them into the darkness.
Sure.
And I love those. That helps you get a vision of who these people are very quickly on, versus them saying, yeah, I'm looking for an advisor. And then you're like, okay, what are we going to do? I mean, you came to me with an idea of 2 guards. And I kind of gave you a Laurel and Hardy thought behind them, and you ran with it a little bit, I would say. And I thought they turned out pretty fantastic, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or Jay and Silent Bob, where one of them literally says nothing, but when he does say something, it's very meaningful and point.
Or the two that I brought in on my last game, Bill Gannon and Joe Friday.
Again, fantastic names. But I think those types of things that give you those opportunities to kind of flex yourself and have reoccurring characters that your players can trust and can put something in. Juxtaposition to that is pets and familiars, which are not necessarily going to communicate at the same level. They're animals. They're not growing.
Yeah.
Rarely, I think in some system, I want to say back in, I want to say second edition, your as a ranger or as a druid, your animal companion did grow, like it gained levels or became something else. Or you transitioned it to something else. I can't remember.
Yeah.
But I want to say there was some kind of growth there.
Animal companions were always a thing like that I always knew existed, but every single time I always forget they exist.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm a much better role player now than I was then, and half of our games I forget that my snow owl rhyme exists.
Yeah, that exists, and it's a familiar,
Yeah.
which you can call and drop whenever pretty much you want.
Mm-hmm.
And especially in 5th edition, it is literally just a summoned kind of semi-permanent creature that is more of an energy than an actual creature.
I like them a lot more in 5th edition because you're a lot less punished for them,
Mm-hmm.
for having them out there. The trick with familiars in earlier editions was always that they were essentially an animal that you created some sort of magical bond with.
Yep.
And so you have this, 3 hit point hawk that is your familiar, and if it dies, you lose, it's a real gut-wrenching experience for the wizard. And I don't remember exactly what the penalties were for it.
It was something in
But there were some direct and harsh penalties for having your familiar
and then
killed.
getting a new one took effort.
It took a lot of effort, yeah. And so you had no incentive whatsoever to send this 3 hit point hawk out to help you for the 1d4 damage it was going to do with its claws.
Right, because that's all it could do.
Yeah.
You'd basically put it somewhere to watch, but you'd have it hide.
So 5th edition's a lot more forgiving with it, with the Find Familiar spell. First off, it's not a given class feature anymore.
Right.
You actually need to do the Find Familiar spell. And then when you do, it is specified that it's basically like a fey creature. It's an otherworldly entity that takes the shape of an animal. But is magically bound to you. If it gets killed, that just means its material body was dissipated and it goes back to the Feywild or whatever your setting is appropriate. You know, in my setting, there was summoned Daedra. And so they would just go back to whatever Daedric plane you... they were summoned from in the first place, and you just had to do a little ritual, spend 10 gold worth of incense, and summon them back.
Yep. Yeah, it was a very simple thing. My current world is a little different, and it's interesting that you guys haven't described what you think is going on there, with everything else you've talked about magically in that world. But at the same time, they are different creations, and how they differ from companions is that traditionally the pets and familiars, depending on the system, definitely have more mechanical rules that apply to them, in mechanical sense of how they come into form and what they're allowed to do. And they aren't necessarily given independent intelligence other than the ability to react to situations.
Right.
It's all about the masters, or the character who's in ownership of them doing the control, and when they can do that control. So it's a very limited intelligence.
Oh, sure. I mean, the fact that we're starting with an animal, whether it's magical of nature or not, you're typically dealing with an intelligence score of 3,
Right.
Where they're not capable of sentient thought or anything like that. I mean, they certainly have, maybe am I misusing sentience?
I think we can avoid it as a term at this moment in time because I don't think it's nearly as important as you.
But what I mean though is that they don't you can't sit them down and ask them what their hopes and dreams are.
Correct.
They're not saving for college.
Right.
They just want to make sure that their master is safe and happy and stuff like that. They want to make sure they're happy and safe and stuff like that. And that's basically it.
Yeah, I mean, it's if you're dealing with the pets versus the familiars, you could argue that they're part of a pack and that they're bonded to their master in a friendly pack sense, and so therefore they're taking care of themselves at the expense of their master, of their pack's need. Sure. And to a degree, you could definitely bend and role play that any necessary wants. Obviously, there are stories where the gray tiger of the group, who the ranger has, dislikes everyone but the ranger, but eventually starts liking the mage because she feeds him. And I think that's where you're given that little bit of leverage as a storyteller to have it still be connected to all the players.
Oh, sure, no, absolutely. And I'm by no means am I trying to insinuate that you can't role play with an animal companion.
Of course not.
You absolutely can. You absolutely can. I've seen it done all the time. I've done it myself.
Yeah.
But you're not, like I said, they're not people, so you're not going to have that same sort of level of complexity that you're going to have with a
they're not going to
humanoid
go
NPC.
do research or do shopping or go thieve things.
Exactly. Your role play is going to be a lot more of like, who's got the food, where are they sleeping tonight, sort of thing.
But they're directed enough to not redirect themselves.
Yes.
And I think there is a distinction between pets and familiars and what they are capable of and things like that.
Sure.
They are not the same thing. You are never going to send a pet into combat unless they are a combat creature. I think that's I think that's the big difference, is that like, okay, your pet is a bear. All right, it's probably going to go fight alongside of you, but it's still a bear. It's not going to just suddenly rush 4 armored guys because you direct it to and stand back and wait for it to get a job done. It's going to fight along your side.
Right. If it's not an animal companion and it's not a pet, or it's not a familiar, if it's literally just a pet, like think the dog or cat you have in your house.
Right.
Pet.
Yeah.
Without a lot of combat training, like I cannot send my cat Paradox into combat.
No, it wants wet food and it's done otherwise.
Yes, if she will complain if she does not get crunchy treats at 7:30. She's not about to fight on my behalf. She is afraid of the vacuum.
Yeah, she's just not stepping in. On the other hand, if it's a summoned creature or part of a sense, like if as a ranger you get a wolf or a bear or something like that.
Sure, again, you're talking about something that's backed by game mechanics.
Correct.
It's either a spell that has summoned it and that is therefore magically compelled, or the magic itself forms it as sort of a magical construct.
Yep.
Or, like I said, you've got a rule that says, yeah, there's this wolf and it really likes you and it will fight for you. Here's the rules for it.
Yeah. I mean, I remember games where people are like, hey, can I have a pet X? And I'm like, yeah, I don't care. And then later on, they're like, well, my pet goes and does this. And I'm like, no.
Your pet fucking doesn't. No, your pet...
No, your pet literally...
is asleep on a warm rock right now.
Exactly. Like, no, that's not how that works. Like, you don't just get a freebie out of that. On the other hand, if you have, animal handling and you pay the money and you get a trained falcon, sure, it could go and retrieve a mouse for you or a squirrel or a bunny or something on hunting, because that's what it can do, but it's also going to eat that damn thing.
Oh god, I'm thinking back to this video I saw of this male hawk that was trying to do some hunting while the female hawk was out.
Oh lord.
And he catches a whole mouse and brings it back, and he's got these tiny little babies. The mouse is bigger than the babies.
Right.
And he just kind of tosses the mouse on top of them and then just stares at them all confused like, why are you not eating?
That's fair.
Luckily, Mom came back and shredded the mouse
Shredded
up a
the
little
mouse,
bit. Yeah.
Slapped around the dad. I could feel that.
I'm just thinking it's like sending out your animal companion falcon and bringing a mouse back and just staring at you all like with that sort of bird-like confusion of like, why are you not eating it?
Yeah, I would tear this thing apart right now if it wasn't for you telling me then this is the right thing. I mean, but it's no different than like your cat bringing a mouse to you on your bed saying, "Look what I did."
See, and I love that sort of role play.
Yeah,
I love that sort of role play because it really humanizes the situation a lot. Or you get cute moments like that. You can take it a little far though.
You can.
Sometimes your storyteller really gets into acting like a cat, and you're like, okay, this is weird now.
Yeah, but I think that's where things get complicated with anything, whether it's your followers, your companions, your pets, whatever. I mean, you can always take it too far. I think that when the companion becomes funnier or part of the story, I think you run heavy risks there, and it can completely complicate the game.
Oh, it can.
Without a doubt.
I think, was where, I kind of wanted to do this show. And there are certain shows that you and I do that are like, hey, I've got some opinions on this, and I want to share this with people because I have a microphone.
Yeah.
And then there are other shows where it's like, I don't know crap about this, and honestly, this vexes me every time it comes up in a game. Let's do a show about it so that will force us to research it.
Okay, that's fair. That is fair. That's how we do our shows.
And then we can have our discussions about it.
Yeah.
People on the Discord can talk about it. People can send in their questions and whatnot, and it forces me to think about it.
Yeah.
And this is one of those shows, because honestly, like, companions, like, not so much animal companions. Like, animal companions are pretty okay to handle, because on the general, unless they're being directed actively to do something like go attack that target over there, animal companions are pretty low key. They manage themselves.
Yeah.
You don't ever have to worry about what the ranger's wolf is doing, because unless he's telling it to go maul somebody, the ranger's wolf is probably sitting next to him.
Yeah. Or hunkered next to him.
Doing wolf things.
Yeah.
You know? But like humanoid companions really complicate things for me. I mentioned earlier Sean wanted to have a couple bodyguards for his noble.
And a wizard, if I remember correctly, yeah.
And a wizard later on. And that was the very first thing I thought. I was like, God, I don't want to, like... We were playing D&D at the time, so, the rules were not as fast or forgiving of companions in combat and such like that, as extra people in combat. So,
right.
It really kind of vexed me a little bit, and I had to like kind of wrap my head. I wanted to say yes to him because it's a good idea.
Sure.
It's a realistic idea, and it makes sense for his character. So it wasn't like I was angry with Sean or anything like that. I don't want to give that impression. But there was a part of me as a storyteller went, this is a hardship I have to take on now. And how accommodating do I want to be with full knowledge of the fact that this vexes me, you know?
Yeah, and I get that, and a lot of times when I'm working with people at the beginning of stories, that hits me as well, where I'm like, I don't know how comfortable I am with adding this to my story, because I can already, like, I'm seeing 4 steps ahead.
Yeah.
Like, how am I going to handle this? How am I going to handle that? And I'm trying to think of all the terrible situations that are going to come in, that are going to be involved, and I'm like, I'm not comfortable with this.
Sure.
You get defensive as a storyteller.
So as I see it, there are 3 main complications that adding like NPC followers bring in. So the first thing, obviously, that combat is already complex enough,
right?
And it gets much longer the more combatants you have on the board, and companions just amplify that number even more.
Well, especially with more tactical games.
Sure.
As you farther into the tactical sphere, you're going to run into more issues. Now, granted, most of those tactical games have good mechanics for that, but it doesn't mean that it's still more pieces on the board.
Yep.
We know this.
Yep, absolutely. The second thing is that players tend to be focused on their own actions and forget that their companions or pets exist. Like I mentioned this earlier, this is one thing, number one with me, where I almost never use a companion or pet ability, simply because I get so wrapped up in playing my character, I forget to play my other character. You know?
Yeah.
Even if the character is even just an owl.
Yeah.
I'm not thinking about an owl. I'm thinking about what spells I'm going to cast it around my sheet.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And then the third one is more from a storyteller standpoint. We want PCs to be the heroes. And so companions can feel like you're taking the glory away from them.
100%.
This isn't a story about some rando NPC. This is a story about the heroic stuff that Theoden does, or Thalion does, or Rhaegar does, you know?
Yeah, you never want a death blow or the final strike or something to come from the companion or the follower or the pet. You know, you want that to come from the direction of the player.
I will say with one notable exception.
What's that?
And that is unless commanded directly by the player.
Correct.
Because then the player can be like, ha ha ha, I've got minions.
Yeah.
And the minions just stab the crap out of somebody, you know?
Yeah.
Then that's kind of cool. Like that feels like you've directed that action, but the impetus for that action came from the player.
Right.
And he's using his NPCs as a tool to do it.
Even 7th with reputation, where you can call for assistance, basically. You can use your reputation to get assistance.
Sure.
Like in the case of a chase where you're being chased and you want to use your reputation to have them assist you in that chase.
Yeah.
I think that's a call to followers and a call to companions to assist you with that type of thing. And I do agree with that wholeheartedly.
Yeah, sure. Because the impetus for the action came from the player.
Correct.
Absolutely.
So.
But yeah, you never want to just be like, oh yeah, and this NPC goes over here and kills this guy.
Yeah.
Oh. Okay, does he? Because I was going to hit him next turn, but okay, I guess that NPC's got that handled. Thanks.
Exactly.
You always want to make sure that the heroic stuff is being done by the heroes, and the menial tasks, the cleanup job, is done for the NPCs there. So let's go through these a little one at a time here. Complex combat.
Ooh, yeah.
What are some of our solutions for this? Because for me, it's just a tedium thing. How do we mitigate that?
I think the biggest thing, obviously, if you're not comfortable throwing more things into combat, don't let it be an option.
Sure.
Don't
be afraid to say no.
Don't be afraid to say no. You don't get guards or you don't get mages who will fight. Make them not have that be an ability. Their assistants. Like maybe your fighter wants a minstrel that's a bard. Mm-hmm. Great. He's just not a combat bard. So the moment combat breaks out, he's hiding.
Yep.
He's back behind the carriage, giving you solid advice. Yes, get him, mm-hmm. Hit him hard. I'll write about this shortly. Let me start working on something. And then he's out of combat. He's not part of it.
Jaskier flashbacks.
Yeah,
exactly.
Witcher. Exactly. That is a good example of that.
Yep.
If you guys remember, Dragonheart, the monk who was in that was constantly trying to write poetry. Mm-hmm. While the Dragon Slayer was out there, and again, that's a good follower who's there to be comical, to be assistive, but at the same time to step back from combat and not be involved in it at all.
Yeah,
and I think that's a great way. A great first step is be comfortable with not doing it. I think the second step is, and this I think sits farther into followers and companions and animal companions as a whole is. Don't let them be another thing in combat. Allow them to do the same thing that familiars do. They can assist, they can give advantage, but they are not physically part of combat. They are not a meat shield. They are not something like that. They can give a specific bonus.
Yeah, I'm of two minds on that. I think if you hand a pike to a follower soldier, you should definitely allow them to stab people with that pike. But I think the big thing is keeping their stat blocks clean.
I think that's definitely the third level.
Not necessarily saying, well, you can't take part in combat. You can only, do the help action or whatever. But rather just being like, look, you can either stab or you can shoot with your bow, and that's it. Like, you don't have spells. You don't have,
right.
You don't give bardic inspiration.
Mm-hmm.
You don't, have reckless attacks or anything. Like, no, that's it. You have a pike. You're an extra.
Right.
You stab things with a pike.
Yeah, my own and that's where I kind of differentiate those two. I think if as a storyteller you want to give someone a basic ability, if it's a foot soldier who's standing next to your fighter, yeah, they can use their pike. They're just not doing anything effective in combat. It gives the fighter advantage because they're there with them.
Sure.
It gives disadvantage on anything that's trying to flank them. Sure, I think that's a great way of handling it as well. And that way they're not losing that person in combat and they're giving it a direct advantage. I think later on, sure, giving them maybe an extra attack that's either ranged or close, sure, I think that works just as well.
Yeah, it could be good.
But it definitely would cut down how much you as a storyteller now have to worry about, okay, an AoE just went off in this area. Are suddenly all of his companions dead?
Maybe.
Right.
That's kind of one of the other, the other dangers of NPCs is like,
mm-hmm.
how powerful do you make them? But I think we'll get there. We've got a whole thing, for that later.
Yeah. I think the other thing that you have to keep in mind, and I think this is another big thing, is when do they go? In the more tactical games, how does their reaction fit into the rest of combat, and how does that carry those benefits?
Yeah, that was one other thing. Because as we mentioned earlier, like this last game of yours last weekend
mm-hmm.
got really heavy into the followers and the summons and everything like that. And looking at a lot of them, like. Each and every single one of them, my Earth Elemental, as well as both of our summoned familiars, says that they roll their own initiative and go on their own turn. And for me, it just so happened actually that I rolled initiative that everybody went on or around my turn. I didn't have anybody between me
right.
and my summons, but like just you having to keep track of yet another thing in the initiative order rather than just going, Sarah, handle all of your stuff right now.
Right.
You've got a bird, you've got an earth elemental, and you've got yourself. Do your stuff.
Right.
Now suddenly we had these things interspersed throughout our initiative order, and
Right.
it was extra bookkeeping for you.
Yeah, and I looking back on it, I'll even say this is that one of the things that I probably should have done is just said, you are the one directing them.
They go on your initiative.
They're never going to react faster than you.
Yep.
They're never going to react faster than you, especially in the case of a situation that you're stepping into. If it's an ambush, you may be able to get that first initial reaction off, and therefore they technically could now move faster than other things. But again, they're still never going to move faster than you.
Yeah, absolutely.
As far as commands wise.
So yeah, I think it definitely could have house ruled that to just go on my turn and stuff like that.
And I may shift that up. And or that they don't just. And the other thing is even having them go much farther after you, like in the case of the other player, it made it even more challenging because okay, so now they're going 4 turns, 4 other events after me. Is this even useful at this point? How is this helpful?
Yeah.
And losing that overall, like, well, what's the use of this?
And they're supposed to be like in a magical extension of us.
Yeah.
Yet they're lagging behind so hard. It's like it's like having a bad connection on a game.
Exactly. What's the significance?
I think one of the other things too is, I don't think this was a bad thing during your game, but as a storyteller, I keep thinking you probably want to like try to remind your players that they exist.
Yeah, forget fitting.
Put it in their heads that they're there.
Yeah,
that those are a thing that they need to bookkeep about, so that you don't get around to them and then be like, okay, well, what is your Earth Elemental doing? Oh, I forgot he was even on the board. And now they're looking through a stat block. No, just make sure that it's on the forefront of your mind of like, that they need to be coming up with these sort of things.
Right.
And they'll come up with a lot more creative stuff if they are remembering it too, rather than trying to make a split decision of, he just punches somebody,
Right.
You can have some really fun stuff if you're prepared for it. You think about it.
Yep. And I think that's, as a plot point, I think that's a huge piece, is that players and storytellers often forget that the pets are involved in the scene as well. I mean, if they're stalking through a city looking for information, the player may not notice something, but there's nothing to say that you can't let the animal companion or the companion or the follower make a comment.
Oh, sure. Yeah, your wolf starts sniffing and digging at something.
Yeah.
Like, what is it? What is it, boy?
Yeah.
Oh, there's something buried over here. Like, that's free information you can just give them because they have an animal companion.
Yeah. Or like your advisor, wizard who's feeding you research as you're going along the trail. As you enter the pub, goes, oh, you always take me to the nicest of places. I wonder how many fingers a bartender has lost this time. And to kind of paint the feel of the space. Oh, this is a lovely smell you found.
Yeah.
Thank you for bringing me here, and those types of things can be ways that your followers bring flavor to a scene, I tried to find you the best wine, but the locals only have vintages from this year. I'm very sorry, my lord. And it's like, okay, you've just put information down and gave a flavor to the space.
Third era, 327. I wouldn't wash my horse in this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that is where they can give opinions. They can give flavor. They can, animal companions can give direct information, or even descriptions, like, smelling something and scrunching their face up or hiding behind you.
Yeah.
As they're going through a dark and misty area that they're scared. Because even though the player isn't scared and the character may not be, if their companion is, that adds another air, because again, it's on their side of the trusted wall.
Oh, sure. Sure, absolutely. I think my other advice for, especially for like animal companions and stuff like that, keeping them close, is to make sure that you kind of think of them and the PC as a contiguous unit.
Okay.
So don't think of the familiar or the wolf as like a separate thing.
Okay.
You think of them like you would think of any other character. The fighter and his greatsword.
Gotcha.
the bard and his lute, the ranger and her bear,
Gotcha.
the warlock and their imp.
Totally makes sense.
Yeah. It's just like anything else, and is an extension of their character. That companion, although more animate, is in a very real, very game sense, a tool, an aspect of their character that they use to get their job done. And it is no more or less special than the fighter and his greatsword.
No, I agree.
Or the bard and his lute.
Yep, I agree. I agree.
And so you just kind of mentally package them together.
Yeah.
No,
I agree with that. Yeah. Do you want to hit questions? Are we good for questions? Because I think we kind of exhausted a few things.
Yeah, I'm looking over the rest of this here.
Is there anything else you wanted to grab?
We talked a little bit about stealing the spotlight from the PCs.
Yeah.
That's actually one last thing I kind of wanted to discuss here is, so we talked a little bit about NPCs should not steal the spotlight from the
unless
PCs.
They're directly directed to do so.
But it kind of, along that line of thinking, though, like you don't want the NPCs stealing the glory from the players, but you want them to be, I suppose, competent enough that they're worth having around in the first place.
Okay.
And what is your what are your thoughts on companion follower power levels? Because, like, the two things that I always think of is, first off, you don't want them, kill stealing.
Correct.
Like, they should not be on par with the heroes because they are not the heroes.
No.
They're followers of the heroes. They're sidekicks at best.
Correct.
But I just envision, like, okay, well, I've put my points into the leadership feat or whatever.
Sure.
The rules of this game grant me 3 NPC followers that have X amount of hit points or whatever. Yeah. And the moment we go in against the Belrog, and like you mentioned earlier, like, I throw a fireball. Are all of his companions dead? I don't know. Are they?
Yeah.
Like, did I spend points and advancement on a feat or an edge or whatever to get something that's literally just going to die in one shot? This is what I kind of call the Skelemancer syndrome, like from Diablo.
Oh,
like,
God, yeah.
Did you ever play a Necromancer in Diablo 2?
I'm familiar with what you're talking about.
And you have a bunch of skeletons, right? Mm-hmm. And you're, like, mowing through enemies because skeletons fighting rumpties is great. Mm-hmm. But then, literally, you're in Act 4, you go up against Diablo. And you're like, I have an army of skeletons. And Diablo goes, that's nice. I have a little wave of fire that hits everything on the screen. Poof!
They're gone.
Where are your skeletons?
Right.
And you go,
well, that was my one-trick pony.
All of my points are in skeletons.
Mm-hmm.
And you just one-shot them.
Yeah.
Well, now I don't have any other point. Like, I don't have anything else I put points in.
Right.
But
I think in that sense, that game was poorly engineered because it was engineered to follow a different scaling.
Sure. I know it's not a one-to-one thing, but you understand kind of how that translates over to, like, so I take the leadership feat in D&D, I get my 3 NPC followers that have X amount of hit points, we're going to go fight the Red Dragon.
Right.
And they get breath weaponed and killed in the first round.
Yeah.
Now, I live because I've got a ton of HP because I'm a hero.
Right.
But I spent a feat on them.
Right.
One of my few precious feats that I get.
Right.
To get these 3 NPC followers, what happens now?
Your leadership sucked.
I guess.
I mean, what the other part of that is the fact of, and this is where I run the same kind of thing is that if you as a summoner summon a fire elemental, right, and one of the NPCs just hits it with water and crits it and reduces it to 0. Your spell is your summoned creature, which took you a minute to cast, is gone.
Sure.
Isn't that the same?
No, because that spell isn't permanently removed from my list.
So here's the difference then. The question is do they get those back?
I don't know. I mean, we're not talking about a summoned magical construct. We're talking about a living, breathing humanoid being here.
We're also talking about the fact that hit points aren't actually your limbs.
I mean, I get that.
Right.
What I'm saying, though, is that there are deeper story ramifications to having 3 sentient humanoids follow you into battle and get one shot by a dragon than there is just a magical construct that you snapped your fingers and summoned up.
I completely agree with you. And I think that's the risks. I think that having, be willing to do that, if you are willing to bring, as a storyteller, other sentient creatures of the same caliber, but less, into the game, that you're putting the burden on the player to make sure that the risks that they put them against are commensurate. You are in a leadership role. Are you going to throw your minions at the enemy's minions? And willing to let them die just as the enemy's minions die?
I don't know.
That's the leadership choice.
I'm honestly asking the question because this is one of the things that I always struggle with is like, how do you have, I've got an NPC bodyguard, right, but I can't make him strong enough to actually guard your body.
Well, and here's the other one that gets me, and this is, I think, the turn for me. Did you ever watch Civil War? The Marvel Civil War?
The Captain America one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a scene where the question gets asked, I think it's in Civil War, where it's Captain America's running outside, and I think it was what is it? One of the other characters goes, "How do we know which ones are bad? Who we should fight? It's the ones shooting at you."
Mm-hmm.
So it's a quick dictate of who's who, but there are tons of followers and companions running for choppers, shooting at enemies, trying to get in, jets to do things, and some of them are getting wiped out and others are actually doing jobs.
Yeah.
That's, I think, the mentality at that point in the story you have to take, is that the player is going to has hired hirelings. Mm-hmm. And I think hirelings are different than followers or different than companions. The question is the player willing to put a risk on their companions?
Yeah, I suppose it's definitely a choice on the player's part to spend those points to get those companions and then say like, "Oh, well, they got hurt." Well, okay. If you didn't want, something that was fragile and squishy and could complain about being hurt after it gets hurt, maybe you should have taken a different edge or feat or something
right,
like that.
But it dictates who you are.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing you can always do, depending on where they get them in the story, is that, again, hit points are not body parts. And if they go to 0, they go to 0. And, okay, they're on the ground. They're incapacitated. They're not functional. Yeah. Doesn't mean they're dead.
Yeah, that's fair.
They will eventually heal, just like you. Maybe not in a short rest or a long rest, but they'll bounce back and eventually be able to assist you again. Mm-hmm. And will they learn from their mistakes, just like you did? Probably. And then you can continue with the story with that. But, I mean, if you also hire 4 or 5 magelings, who are helping with research, and you put them in front of you like a human shield to tell them all to cast, magic missile at the dragon at the same time to try to help you, no, they're dead.
Yeah.
They just got killed, and you were the ones who killed them. Mm-hmm. That's obvious. You're a terrible person.
Yeah.
So, you now have minions to your evil force. You are the baddie.
All right, let's hit some of these questions here.
All right, grab one.
All right, so Ogdenme asks, I have a party where 2 of the 4 members have familiars. The fighter of the group understands one of these as to be a pet, and has now expressed an interest in finding a pet for himself.
Of course they have.
Aside from the few questions at a couple of villages about pet stores in the area, which they then direct him to the local butcher or farm, he has not expressed what he is looking for or inquired further. How much of an effort as a storyteller to make some type of pet available to him? What would you do to gently encourage him or discourage him from considering he has not followed the leads given?
First,
I've got a couple answers to
I've got several answers as well. I'll let you start.
All right, so first off, as we discussed before, pets are not animal companions, nor are they familiars.
Correct.
This guy can absolutely go out and get himself a pet snake
Yep.
that will hide on a hot, in the warm part of his...
into his chest plate and curl up.
And he will need to feed it mice, and that is literally all it does.
Yeah.
Is it will be lazy, and he
Yep.
needs to feed it mice.
Yep.
The other thing is, as far as like what the storyteller's burden to make this available to him or to encourage or discourage him. Personally, I think the amount of effort I will put in as a storyteller is equal to the amount of effort the player is putting in.
Agreed.
If they have asked me once and I have given them an answer and then they have not pursued it, I don't feel obligated to pursue it further because clearly they are not interested in pursuing it further. But
I have opinions about that,
but also like I think this is a conversation you should be having out of game rather than in game. For instance, Sean was asking about getting a mage. And for a little while, I thought he wanted him as another bodyguard.
Right.
And so I was like, I don't want to have like 3 NPCs following you around doing all your fighting for you. You got 2 stabby ones, and now you want one to cast magic missile for you. And he's like, no. I was thinking for a research assistant. And I was like, oh, well, crap, that I can do,
Yeah.
Now that we've talked about it, but like I thought when you said you wanted a mage follower, you wanted a combat follower, not just some guy to like do research for you. He's like, no, I don't want to put him in combat. Okay, cool. Now that I understand what your expectations are as a player, I can help implement them as a storyteller. And so I think
that's huge.
The answer to this question is honestly have a conversation with your fighter player and be like, what are you as a player? Not even as a character. What are you as a player attempting to get out of this interaction?
Yeah, if it's a mechanical advantage, then they have to make a cost for it. There has to be some kind of cost associated with it, and gold is not a cost. Gold is something, gems, gold, whatever you want to say. It is not a tangible resource unless that's something in your game that is limited. I would say go with, like, maybe it costs them a feat, look for something mechanical that can assist this. I think, on the other hand, if they are literally looking for a roleplay pet that they can roleplay with like the rest of the people in the group.
That's no problem.
And that's not a problem at all. And I would say, and this is just me, I would say put the opportunity at the end of a event. Meaning maybe they go and, search a building that's been ruined after a fight, right? And, things get toppled over and whatever, and as the fighter is sifting through and looking for gear, he lifts up the door to, look at what gear one of the guys had, and hiding under the door is a little puppy who's scared. Give him that opportunity.
Yeah.
Or he finds a kitten, or he finds something mundane, something that's fitting of the setting and the area that they're in, that is mundane.
There's even rules I saw somewhere, I don't remember where they are. I don't remember if they're even official Wizards of the Coast things for, like, raising different types of animals as pets.
There's definitely a whole raising book. And for me, that gets right into the minutia rule of how much minutia are you willing to manage?
Well, sure, but it's available to you as a storyteller. Yeah. You make that decision by yourself. But I'm just saying, it's out there. Is if you want to go that angle with it. If you do 100%. Want to give him a pet that gives him a mechanical bonus and stuff like that, and he wants to take the time to raise it by hand and build that bond with it over the course of several game sessions and of course of several in-game time.
He's spending the role play.
He's spending the role play. He's spending the resources to do it. Sure.
Yeah.
If that's the direction you are okay as a storyteller going.
Yep.
Go for it,
Lean into it.
That sort of thing's out there.
All right. I think we did good there.
What you got?
Mad Elf. If it's not part of the initial discussion, I'd love to hear some of the thoughts about mechanics of companion familiar pets. Are there separate individual characters with stat blocks? Are there spell created and all their details are in the spell rules, or AI and bot created? Are there rules, mechanics which provide attributes, powers, abilities to the owner? In essence, are they a trapping for a spell or power in Suede, for instance? I honestly think that all of those things could be true. It depends on the storyteller.
It depends on the game system.
And the game system.
It really depends on the game system.
I think. I would definitely say it starts with a system, and I think after that, it depends on how much investment the storyteller wants.
Yeah. So like I was saying earlier, I think it's probably most important that you, if it is a class feature or an edge or however, whatever game system gives you that mechanic. If it is a mechanic tied to your character, then yeah, absolutely, it should be considered part of your character. It should be granted to you in some way.
Correct.
If it is lost, there should be some contrivance to get it back to you.
Mm-hmm. Or to replace it.
Or, to replace it, exactly. I'm a big fan of keeping their stat blocks and stuff like that very very tight.
Mm-hmm.
So keep them simple so that your because first off, options I think are more of a character thing than an NPC thing.
Agreed.
I think characters should be dynamic enough within the space of a story to be able to do multiple different things. Whereas like an NPC follower or a companion pet or something like that, really should be kind of a, if you'll pardon the obvious pun, one-trick pony.
Yep. No, very true.
It limits the player choice in combat as well. So you're never sitting there going, well, which of my 5 different abilities am I going to use right now for my pet? No. They can do one thing.
Mm-hmm.
They can smash.
Right.
Or maybe they've got a one-time thing they can use.
Right. And I think it's always commensurate to the cost.
Yep.
If I'm burning a 5th level spell slot for a summoned creature, I'm burning a percentage of my abilities.
Oh yeah, sure. Like,
but if I just have a pet that doesn't cost me anything, food, service, or otherwise, it doesn't get 5 powers.
Yes, exactly.
That can be used at random, ad nauseum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So I think we did address most of that question during the discussion.
I definitely agree.
We're going to move on to Knox in the Box. Would assume that having a pet companion in the game is treated in a similar maintenance responsibility as real life. That being said, are there some systems that handle this better than others, and could they be translated into other games? Are there good online resources for managing these PC friendlies?
Yes, you can get into the micro. There are definitely rules out there. I know for D&D there are several different non-system rules, but there are rules for companions and hirelings and things like that in the I think it's Strongholds addendum that they put out. There is some errata that I did find additionally that goes into pet maintenance and things like that, as well as leveling of pets. But again, it's not required. It's not something that's hard and fast. But if you want to get into that minutia level, by all means, it's out there without a doubt.
I would say, again, largely depends on the style of game you're playing. If you're playing like a hardcore survival thing, and like food and water is a concern that you're including in your gaming, like you're doing a hex crawl or something,
sure,
absolutely. Like you need to feed your animal companion too.
Yeah.
Not my style.
No,
not my style. I like to gloss over a lot of the minutia and play Fast and Furious. So, for me, I assume you're a hero. If you can fight a dragon, you can remember to feed your damn dog.
Yeah. Right. No, I agree with that statement wholeheartedly. I think that the minutia, like you're not telling them that they didn't sharpen their blades, so they're doing less damage now. They're doing 1d4 less damage. Oh, you forgot spell components to buy spell components. So you roll on a percentile to see if you even have it.
Right.
You're not doing that. If you are, by all means, continue. That's a game that maybe your players love, but otherwise you're adding minutia just to make your life difficult.
Yeah, and you're making it so that your players have to remember to specify every last little thing that they do. And so how much of your game is spent going, okay, I remember to breathe, my heart remembers to beat, I eat a healthy breakfast in the morning, I have a cup of coffee, I place my right foot, then left foot, then right foot, then left foot, then right foot,
Yeah. Swinging at the hip,
right.
Walking heel toe, So, yeah, just be mindful of how much level of minutia you're adding to your game and whether or not your players even want it. I know some players who would die for this at a table of 4, maybe 1.
Sure.
The rest of them don't want Tamagotchis.
Yeah.
And if you're not familiar with Tamagotchi, go look it up. I'm not telling that story. That's a great
way of putting it.
Yep.
A great way of putting it.
Yep.
So Overwatch asks, players with companions often want to make them the focus of gameplay. How do you tell good stories with companions without turning the session into that episode about the dog?
Oh boy. When it's the player who's directing them constantly, they're using them like their sword or their bow or their spells, I think it's kind of okay so long as whatever it is returns to the owner. That it's their point to shine, kind of a thing. And honestly, if the player is doing that actively, that's still them telling the story. That's them being happy about that aspect of the story. I think the problem is when, as an NPC, you're driving them and things are happening and you're basically telling the story that the players are watching. I think that's where your risk comes in. I
agree 100%. I have nothing to add. Dead serious. You just hit all the points I was going to make.
Yeah, I think I've had more than enough times where players have leaned into their weapons, their magical weapons and things like that, so far that basically the weapon becomes the legendary item of the party, and not the player. Not that character. And the only way that you can shift that is to have the followers tell the story, or people around them, a reputation, if you will, become attached to the character and not whatever X was, and that's challenging. That's a challenging thing because there's a lot of players who don't want to be in the spotlight. They'd much rather have their wolf do it, or their whatever, their magical creation take care of it, and they're just the little puppet master behind them, quietly doing it, not wanting the fame. Well, it wasn't me. My golem did all that. He's the one who deserves the statue, kind of a thing. And that's a way of storytelling. That's a way of letting your players have that bit of freedom at the same time. Sure. So.
Yeah, I think sometimes, as long as the agency remains with the player, I don't think there's a problem with it being the episode about the dog. Just let the player tell the episode about the dog, that's all. So next week's topic, we're going to be talking about storytelling without combat.
Now, it's not saying that there isn't combat. That's just saying that we're kind of removing the tactical aspects of it.
Yes, and how do you move through dangerous and combative situations without pulling out miniatures? You can find us on Twitter at @ST_Conclave, on Instagram at @ST_Conclave. Listen to us live every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on mixlr.com/storyteller-conclave, and join the discussion up on our Discord. You can find that link to our Discord up on our Twitter, as well as our website, storytellerconclave.com.
We'd like to thank our Patreons, especially our name members, Knox in the Box, Sam, the Arcane Asylum, Sparkle Motion, Vedran, and Hulavu. You make this happen every month. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Our pre-show music, if you've heard it, is by Arcane Anthems. You can check them out at patreon.com/arcaneanthems. Our intro music is Beyond the Warriors by Geefrog. You can find that at geefrog.bandcamp.com or on Google Music. And our outro music, which you're hearing right now, is Only Our Footprints in the Sand by Midair Machine. You can find them at freemusicarchive.org.
And a big shout out, as always, to our families, Vicky and Sean. Thank you so much for staying with us all this time, supporting us. All of our friends who sat with us at our tables over the years, give us these great stories and experiences to share with you. And you, every single one of our listeners, we love you so much.
Love you guys.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Good night.
Good night.